Hello friends, Pug Punter here, bringing you another Dota 2 video on behalf of Dota Alchemy, and this video is going to be on how to play Doom in the current patch that I forget which one it is because there's so many letters, but how to play Doom in the current patch. It'll be in the title, so without further ado, let's get right into it. Okay guys, we're going to do a speed round for itemization and skill build on Doom. Stout Shield first, 2 Tangos, 1 Healing Salve, save 100 gold when your team gets the bounty runes, buy a Quelling Blade from the side shop as soon as you can, or a stick if you're fighting. Buy a Midas if you feel like you're not going to apply any pressure and if you're not going to take any pressure and you just want to farm. Get Phase Boots first, buy a Crown from the side shop, send out a Windlace, get Drums of Endurance because it's a broken item, always your first big item. Then after that, go for Blink Dagger if you want to gank. After that, go for BKB. You can also go BKB first instead of Blink Dagger. If you're team fighting, after BKB, you go for Blink. After Blink, you go for BKB. Those are always the 2 items you want to go in sequence. Then after that, send out a Shiva's Guard, Refresher Orb, and then you can go for kind of late game luxury items that can also be refreshed, such as Sheepstick. Skill build. Alright, start with Devour, eat a creep on the first wave, Scorched Earth if you want to kill people, level 2, Infernal Blade if you want to harass people, level 2. Always go for the second point in Devour, almost always, unless you don't need the regen, because it more than doubles in regen at level 2. It's a value point. Then, after that, you basically max out Devour if you want to be greedy, max out Scorched Earth if you want to kill people with Doom, max out Infernal Blade if you want to harass people in lane. This hero is very versatile in terms of what you can build and in terms of his skills. After that, go for Doom at level 6. It's your kill threat. You have to go for this. After you max one of these 2 spells, you almost always want to go Devour because that's your way of getting gold in the mid to late game. Level 10, go for the 20 Scorched Earth damage talent. If you are a damage dealer for your team, if you have a Terror Blade and you don't need to do damage, go for the Scorched Earth movement speed because that gives you mobility. Then at level 15, you want to go for the 150 bonus gold. Almost never see people going for the 20% evasion. After that, go for the 40 Doom DPS at level 20 because the Ancients just aren't that useful and Doom is your kill threat. It's pure damage. Does a lot of damage. Level 25, the Cleave is a meme build, so go for the 3% Infernal Blade damage because you can kill somebody from full to 0 in like a few seconds with this Infernal Blade damage. It's really nuts. One final thing I want to say about skills is a lot of people will skip leveling Doom at these individual increments unless they're the damage dealer for their team because all it does is increase the damage. That's it. Doesn't do anything else. It actually makes it worse in terms of the mana cost. So sometimes people will just leave Doom level 1 up until they have everything else maxed out, and then they'll finally go for points in Doom if they're just using it as a disable. Step number 1 when it comes to laning with Doom is run behind the tower, and on the very first creep wave, eat the enemy ranged creep. Step number 2 is to look for a hard camp creep to eat. If you're in a particularly hard lane, what you can do is what I did in this game, where you cut the second creep wave, pull it behind your tower, and then go eat your hard camp. What you can also do, if you're in a dominant lane where you know that you can just walk into the lane and fight, is to eat a creep in their hard camp. The ideal creep is a Satyr with the Unholy Aura, which will allow you to sustain the lane with a ridiculous amount of regen, and the other creeps are pretty good. Basically, the worst one you can get is a Troll Summoner. You want to look to get the stun from the Centaur, the Aura from this guy, or the Clap from the Ursa. Step 3, use your Devour off cooldown, use your Infernal Blade off cooldown on your laning opponent, and use Scorched Earth to run them down and kill them when they eventually get low enough that you can go for the kill. Also, you can spam your Thunderclaps, your War Stomps, whatever neutral creep you have. It's very low mana cost to use those spells, so use all of that shit in your repertoire to just try to pressure the lane. Step number 4, and this is the most important step. At a certain point, your opponents will be pushed out of the lane. Generally, it's when you hit level 6, because if they come into the lane, you doom them, they die, and then they leave anyway. So what do you do at this point? You're free farming. Do you continue farming? No, you need to pressure, because generally when people leave your lane, pressure is going to be applied somewhere else, and you need to relieve that for your team. And the way that you do that is not by going to their lane, it's by taking the tower. The way you do that is with you get a chainmail, you get a ring of protection, you devour a creep, and you tank the tower so that your siege creep stays alive. Even if you don't have a siege creep, your creeps do damage to towers, and you can tank the tower a little bit and not put yourself dangerously low so they stay alive. Then eventually you can have your carry come to the bot lane or whatever lane you're in, and then you go to the lane that's hard, and then instead of having 1 core farming, you have 2 cores farming. That shouldn't be, and it's just because you took the tower and they didn't. Step number 5, rotate somewhere else. use Doom, use your Scorched Earth, abuse the fact that your hero is amazing at fighting, and you need to essentially be the reason that the laning phase ends because your opposing team is so afraid of you that they don't want to sit in a lane on their own. Yes, for delivery, please. Yep, extra pepperoni nipples. Thank you. Okay, so in the mid-game on Doom, there are 3 possible states that the game can be in for you. 3 possible things that you should be focusing on. So the first thing that you can do is 5-man with your team and take towers. In this sort of state, you just want to make sure you have a Devour up so you're tanky and you can frontline. Doom a target that you think is important, whether it's the guy that's going to heal everybody, the guy that's going to do damage. It doesn't matter. Just make sure that you have an idea of how you want to take a team fight, and then just do it. The only complicated thing about this is sometimes you can take all the tier 1s, but it's not so easy to take the tier 2, so you should go into a more farming state, and that's the second state. So how do you farm? So what you do on Doom is you can basically occupy an area with your team, whether you're 5-manning and pushing or you're just kind of jungling in an area together. And here's what you do. You sit in trees. Once your team leaves an area, you sit in trees, and what happens, because this generally happens in Dota, the enemy team will swap locations with you. So you'll take their jungle, they'll take yours, and then you'll swap jungles at a certain point. But if you're waiting in trees, and make sure you have your Devour on cooldown, because that's how you get farm while you're doing this. If you're waiting in trees, you can get a crucial pick off, and of course because Doom has Doom and Infernal Blade, you can basically get a pick off on any hero from full to 0. You can win the game from one single pick off if you do that. So I would recommend that in most games. Sit in trees a lot more than you would on other heroes. And then we have the third state, and this is also a farming state, but this is generally the state that you want to be in if you think that your team needs space to be created for them. So if you've like anti-mages and TAs or whatever, a lot of the time you can essentially just run to the dead lane, which is just the hardest lane for your team to be in. Look at the lanes and just think, okay, where's the enemy team? Where are they going to kill somebody if somebody goes there? And you can go to that lane on Doom because it's so hard for them to kill you because you're very tanky. You sit there, you feed a little bit, but it's okay because you'll get farm, your team will get farm elsewhere, and you'll make space. So next, I want to talk about some of the things that I've learned from spamming Doom. First and foremost, you should be using your phase boots to exclusively gap close. One of the big issues with this hero, if you're spamming phase, is that sometimes you'll run in, I want to Doom this guy, I use the Doom on him, but let's say I don't have my phase boots, he runs, I run, the Scorched Earth damage is not enough to kill him, and I don't get the Infernal Blade off, but the Infernal Blade would otherwise be enough to kill him. And that's where the phase boots comes in handy. If you need 2 Infernal Blades, you can phase boots, and then later use drums to get the second Infernal Blade, and a lot of the time that's enough to combo and kill somebody off. Speaking of Infernal Blade, you should also be using your ult, and then whatever your key is to cast a spell, so that way it will toggle it on so that you can use your right click to do the Infernal Blade instead. And the reason that's important, instead of just casting it manually, is because this way you can A-click the ground, like this, and then if this guy jukes me around trees, I don't need to move my mouse to him to hit him. It's going to automatically target him for me. And that's something that you can't do by pressing this ability. Speaking of pressing abilities, you should be keeping your Devourer on cooldown at all points into the game. So now that you can just alt-click this and toggle it so that you don't get the creep spell, you can keep the creep spell that you want, and use this basically just for the tankiness and the bonus gold. Mostly the tankiness in fights. A lot of the time you'll see somebody fighting and they'll devour a creep. Speaking of fighting, you should almost never Doom the target that you see first. Like almost all of the time that's going to be a mistake. Basically what you should be doing is just have an idea before the fight actually starts of who you want to go on, whether it's an Oracle because they're saving people, a Terrorblade who does damage, the stunner on the enemy team because they have only one stunner. Just have an idea and adjust it throughout the game. Generally, if you have an idea, it'll be fine because most people play Dota without an idea of what they're doing. Speaking of using the Doom, be careful fighting without Doom. That's the #1 situation where you'll see people lose with this hero is they don't have the Doom and they take a fight anyway. And if you're not super far ahead, that's almost always a mistake. If you don't have Doom, you should be looking for pickoffs and just kind of split push, take bounties, and so forth. Speaking of bounties, you should feel free to use that extra gold to switch up your item build to you know, Crimson Guard, Solar Crest, whatever you think you need, because this hero is very versatile in terms of what you can build. So don't feel like you're obligated to go for the general build if you really need an item. Speaking of items, sometimes Doom is very important for fights. That's nothing to do with items, but the keyboard was falling off my head, so I use that as a segue anyway. And sometimes you should use your Doom to counter-initiate instead of to initiate, because it is that important. And the reason that it's easier to counter-initiate instead of initiate and get a good Doom off is because if you're counter-initiating, this guy goes in, enemy team shows themselves because they go on whoever this is. Let's assume it's not Doom. I'm standing in the trees with a Blink Dagger. They show their positions, and then I can go once I have that information. I would say most of the time in Dota, that's not going to be the case right now, just because you get a lead on Doom. You're so tanky, you can just go in, and if you Doom somebody, you'll generally win a fight if it's not a bad Doom target. So I would say just with how the meta is right now, that's not really going to be how you have to play most of the time, but sometimes you need to be a counter-initiator, and it's just important that you take note of that, because you don't want to just lose those games where you need to get that crucial Doom off. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please make sure to comment below how many cigarettes you think I could eat without dying. Maybe, you know, your typical Marlboro Reds, something like that. So anyway, thank you for watching. I do appreciate it, and I hope to see you in another video.